Before we get into the story, leave a comment and let us know what city you're watching from. And don't forget to rate the story from 0 to 10 at the end. Enjoy the story. The fluorescent lights of Hartwell and Associates hummed softly above Emma Clark's desk as she stared at the spreadsheet that had been her companion for the past 3 hours. Numbers blurred together, profit margins and quarterly projections dancing before her tired eyes like some cruel mathematical ballet. She rubbed her temples, willing away the headache that had been building since lunch, and glanced at the clock on her computer screen. 7:45 p.m. The office had emptied hours ago, leaving only the occasional cleaning staff member pushing a cart down the carpeted hallways. Emma was alone with her work, as usual, and with thoughts she'd been trying desperately to suppress for the better part of 6 months. Those thoughts all centered on one person, James Hartwell, her boss, the co-founder of the marketing firm where she'd worked for 2 years, and the most infuriatingly attractive man she'd ever had the misfortune of developing feelings for. It wasn't supposed to happen this way. Emma had rules. Rule number 1, never date anyone from work. Rule number 2, definitely never fall for your boss. Rule number 3, if you somehow manage to break rules 1 and 2, absolutely do not let it show. She'd been doing admirably well with Rule 3, or so she thought, keeping her interactions with James professional, her smiles polite but not too warm, her eyes carefully trained on documents and screens rather than the way his shirt fit across his shoulders, or how his dark hair fell just slightly over his forehead when he was concentrating. James Hartwell was 36, 8 years older than Emma, and had built his company from nothing into one of the most respected boutique marketing firms in the city. He was brilliant. Everyone said so, with an instinct for campaigns that bordered on prescient. But it wasn't his business acumen that made Emma's heart race every time he stopped by her desk. It was the way he listened when people spoke, really listened, his gray eyes focused and intent. It was how he remembered small things, like how she took her coffee or that she had a cat named Fitzgerald. It was the rare smile that transformed his usually serious face into something boyish and unguarded, a smile she'd only seen a handful of times, but that had burned itself into her memory with painful clarity. Tonight, that smile felt very far away. Emma was exhausted, not just from the long hours, but from the constant effort of pretending she didn't feel the way she did. She closed her laptop with more force than necessary and began gathering her things. Her phone buzzed as she was shoving files into her bag. A text from her best friend, Sophie. "Wine night at my place? You sound like you need it." Emma had apparently sent a venting message earlier that she barely remembered typing. She did need it. She needed to talk to someone who wasn't a coworker, someone who wouldn't judge her for this hopeless, ridiculous crush that was starting to consume more mental energy than she could afford to spare. 40 minutes later, Emma was curled up on Sophie's overstuffed couch, a generous glass of red wine in her hand, and her shoes kicked off onto the floor. Sophie, who had known Emma since college and possessed an almost supernatural ability to extract confessions, had needed only 3 questions before Emma was spilling everything. The way James had touched her hand last week when passing her a file, his fingers lingering just a second too long. How he'd stayed late with her 2 nights ago, ordering Thai food and working side by side until midnight, their conversation drifting from work to books to childhood memories, easy and natural in a way that had made Emma's chest ache. The way he looked at her sometimes, or maybe she was imagining it. Maybe it was just wishful thinking. Maybe she was completely delusional. "You should tell him," Sophie said, refilling Emma's glass with the confidence of someone who had never been in love with her boss. Emma laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "Oh, sure, I'll just march into his office tomorrow and announce that I've been harboring inappropriate feelings for him. That'll go well. I'll be fired by lunch." Sophie shook her head, her dark curls bouncing. "You won't be fired. James isn't like that. And honestly, I've seen the way you describe him looking at you. I don't think you're imagining things." Emma wanted to believe her, but the wine was making her maudlin rather than brave. The truth was that James Hartwell was successful, sophisticated, probably had his pick of anyone he wanted. What would he see in his 28-year-old employee who spent most of her time buried in market research and wore the same 3 blazers in rotation? By her 3rd glass, Emma's thoughts had grown fuzzy around the edges. The sharp pain of longing dulled into something almost pleasant, a warmth that spread through her chest and made everything seem possible, or at least less hopeless. Sophie had moved on to talking about her own dating disasters, a string of bad first dates that should have been funny but somehow weren't. And Emma found her mind wandering back to the office, to James, to all the things she wished she could say, but never would. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through her messages with him. All professional, all carefully neutral. The client approved the campaign. Meeting moved to 2 p.m. Great work on the presentation today. Nothing that revealed the way her hands shook slightly every time his name appeared on her screen. "You know what you should do," Sophie said suddenly, her eyes bright with wine and mischief. "You should call him right now and tell him how you feel. Just get it out there. What's the worst that could happen?" Emma stared at her friend in horror. "The worst that could happen? Sophie, I could completely humiliate myself. I could ruin our working relationship. I could make everything impossibly awkward. I could—" But Sophie was already pressing the phone into Emma's hand, and Emma was drunk enough that the idea was starting to seem less insane and more like the solution to a problem she'd been carrying around for too long. Her fingers found James's name in her contacts before her brain could fully engage, and she was calling him before she could think better of it. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times, and Emma's heart hammered against her ribs. What was she doing? This was crazy. This was career suicide. She should hang up right now, pretend this never happened, blame it on the wine and temporary insanity. But then the ringing stopped, and James's voice filled her ear, professional and slightly distracted. "You've reached James Hartwell. I'm unable to take your call right now. Please leave a message and I'll get back to you as soon as possible." The beep sounded, sharp and final, and Emma opened her mouth to say something normal, something work-appropriate. But what came out instead was the truth, unfiltered and raw. "James, hi, it's Emma. Emma Clark, obviously. You know who I am. We work together. That was stupid to say. I'm calling because I'm at Sophie's, and I've had some wine, maybe too much wine. And I need to tell you something that I've been trying not to tell you for months now. I think about you all the time. Like, all the time. When I'm working, when I'm not working, when I'm trying to fall asleep at night. I think about the way you smile when you're reading something funny, and how you always remember how I take my coffee, and that thing you do where you run your hand through your hair when you're stressed. I think about what it would be like to be someone you could look at, the way you look at advertising campaigns, with that focus and intensity, like nothing else matters." Emma's voice cracked slightly, and she pressed on, unable to stop now that she'd started. "I know this is completely inappropriate, and I'm probably ruining everything by telling you, but I can't keep pretending I don't feel this way. You're brilliant and kind, and you make me want to be better at everything I do. And I'm terrified that you'll hear this and think I'm unprofessional or that I can't separate my personal feelings from work. But the truth is, I've been separating them for 6 months, and it's exhausting. I like you, James. More than like you. I think I might be falling in love with you, and I'm sorry if that makes things weird. But I needed you to know." Okay, that's all. I'm going to hang up now before I say anything else mortifying. Goodbye. Emma ended the call and stared at her phone in mounting horror as the reality of what she'd just done crashed over her like a wave of ice water. The pleasant wine buzz evaporated instantly, replaced by a sick, churning dread that made her stomach drop. Sophie was looking at her with wide eyes, caught somewhere between admiration and concern. Did you actually just— "Oh my God," Emma whispered, cutting her off. "Oh my God, what did I just do?" "Sophie, what did I just do?" She stood abruptly, nearly knocking over her wine glass in her panic, and began pacing the small living room. "I left a voicemail. A rambling, wine-drunk, completely inappropriate voicemail confessing my feelings to my boss. My boss? Sophie. James is going to hear that tomorrow morning, and he's going to think I'm insane. He's going to think I'm some pathetic employee who can't maintain professional boundaries. I need to get that message back. Can you get voicemails back? There has to be a way." Sophie caught her arm, stopping her frantic pacing. Breathe. Just breathe for a second." But Emma couldn't breathe. Her chest felt tight, panic clawing its way up her throat. She grabbed her phone again, pulling up James's contact, her thumb hovering over the call button. "I'll call him again. I'll leave another message explaining that the first message was a joke, or a mistake, or you'll make it worse," Sophie said gently but firmly. "Emma, what's done is done. Maybe he won't even listen to it. Maybe he'll delete it without hearing the whole thing. Maybe I should start looking for a new job right now," Emma finished, sinking back onto the couch and burying her face in her hands. Her whole body felt hot with embarrassment, her skin prickling with mortification. She played the message back in her head, every earnest word, every vulnerable admission, and wanted to disappear into the floor. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of anxiety and regret. Sophie tried to comfort her, offering reassurances that seemed increasingly hollow as the night wore on. By the time Emma called an Uber to take her home, she'd already mentally drafted her resignation letter 3 times. She barely slept, her mind spinning through worst-case scenarios and humiliating conversations she'd have to endure. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw James's face, imagined his expression as he listened to her drunken confession, pictured the pity or awkwardness or professional concern that would replace his usual easy demeanor around her. Morning came too quickly and felt like a punishment. Emma stood in front of her closet for 15 minutes, unable to decide what to wear, as if the right outfit could somehow make the situation less catastrophic. She finally settled on her most professional suit, armor against the day ahead, and forced herself to eat toast that tasted like cardboard. Her phone remained mercifully silent. No call from James, no text, no emergency meeting request. Maybe Sophie was right. Maybe he hadn't listened to the voicemail yet. Maybe he never would. Maybe she could get through this day, and the next, and the one after that, and they could both pretend it never happened. And eventually, the memory would fade into something she could laugh about at her retirement party decades from now. The office looked exactly the same as always when Emma arrived, which felt wrong somehow. The world should look different after what she'd done. But the same abstract art hung on the cream-colored walls. The same potted plants sat on the reception desk. The same smell of coffee and printer toner filled the air. Emma kept her head down as she walked to her desk, hyper-aware of every person she passed, convinced they all somehow knew about the voicemail, that her shame was written across her face in permanent marker. She just settled into her chair and opened her laptop when her phone pinged. A calendar notification. Office party tonight, 6 p.m., rooftop terrace. Emma had completely forgotten about the quarterly celebration James and his business partner hosted every 3 months, a casual gathering meant to boost morale and acknowledge everyone's hard work. Her stomach twisted. A party. She'd have to face James at a party, with their colleagues around, with nowhere to hide, and no spreadsheets to focus on instead of his eyes. She considered calling in sick, but that would be too obvious, too suspicious. She'd have to go. She'd have to paste on a smile and make small talk and pretend her entire world wasn't imploding. The morning dragged by with agonizing slowness. Emma threw herself into work, using deadlines and research as a shield against her spiraling thoughts. She avoided the break room and ate lunch at her desk, terrified of running into James in any casual setting before she'd had time to prepare herself. But he never appeared. No impromptu desk visits, no meeting requests, no emails about anything other than the standard project updates. The silence felt ominous. By 5:30, Emma had changed her mind about attending the party approximately 17 times. She was currently on attempt number 18 at convincing herself it would be fine, that she could slip in, show her face for half an hour, and leave before anything awful happened. She touched up her makeup in the bathroom, her hands unsteady, and practiced neutral expressions in the mirror. Polite smile, professional demeanor. Absolutely nothing to suggest that she'd left an emotional voicemail for her boss less than 24 hours ago. She looked pale, she thought, and her eyes had the slightly wild quality of someone who hadn't slept properly in days. Nothing to be done about it now. The rooftop terrace was already crowded when Emma emerged from the elevator, her colleagues scattered in small groups, drinks in hand, the city skyline glowing in the early evening light behind them. Someone had strung up white lights that cast everything in a warm, flattering glow, and a table laden with appetizers stood against one wall. Music played from speakers Emma couldn't see, something upbeat and generic. She made a beeline for the bar, deciding that if she was going to survive this evening, she'd need something to take the edge off, though she was also acutely aware that alcohol was what had gotten her into this mess in the first place. "Emma!" She turned to find Marcus from accounting approaching, his tie loosened and his smile wide. They'd worked together on a few projects and got along well enough, though Emma had always suspected he was slightly interested in her in a way she couldn't reciprocate. "Glad you made it. Have you tried the mushroom things? They're incredible." Emma accepted a glass of white wine from the bartender and managed what she hoped was a normal smile. "Not yet. Just got here." Marcus launched into a story about something that had happened in his department that afternoon, and Emma nodded along, only half listening, her eyes scanning the crowd for James. She spotted him finally, standing near the far railing with his business partner, Lauren, and two clients she recognized from recent meetings. He looked relaxed, laughing at something one of the clients said, and Emma felt her chest constrict painfully. He looked normal, completely unaffected, like nothing had changed. Maybe it hadn't, for him. Maybe the voicemail had been so far beyond the realm of what he'd expected from her that he'd simply deleted it, filed it away as an aberration not worth acknowledging. The thought should have been comforting, but instead felt like a different kind of rejection, the kind where she wasn't even worth a conversation, worth addressing directly. Emma forced herself to focus on Marcus's story, contributing appropriate responses at what she hoped were the right moments, trying to act like a person who hadn't recently humiliated herself in spectacular fashion. The party flowed around her, laughter and conversation creating a buffer of normalcy she desperately wanted to believe in. She'd almost convinced herself she might survive the evening unscathed when she saw James disengage from his group and begin making his way through the crowd, toward her. Emma's grip tightened on her wine glass, her pulse suddenly loud in her ears. This was it. He was going to pull her aside, tell her gently but firmly that her voicemail was inappropriate, that he hoped they could move past it, that he valued her as an employee, but, always but. Marcus was still talking, oblivious to her distraction, and Emma tried to prepare herself, tried to arrange her face into something that wouldn't betray how terrified she was. But James walked past her with barely a glance, offering only a brief nod and a "Emma, Marcus," in greeting before continuing toward the bar. Emma exhaled shakily, unsure whether she felt relieved or devastated. Marcus, finally noticing her distraction, followed her gaze. "You okay?" "You look a little pale." She forced a smile that felt like it might crack her face. "Fine. Just tired." Long week. It was a massive understatement, but Marcus seemed to accept it, launching into a new topic about weekend plans and a concert he had tickets for. Emma nodded mechanically, her attention fractured, watching James from the corner of her eye as he chatted with the bartender, seemingly without a care in the world. The minutes crawled by with excruciating slowness. Emma tried to circulate, moving from group to group, making the required small talk, laughing at jokes that didn't register as funny. She was operating on autopilot, her mind stuck in a loop of anxiety and confusion. Why hadn't James said anything? Had he even listened to the voicemail? The not knowing was almost worse than any conversation would have been, leaving her suspended in this awful limbo where anything seemed possible and nothing felt real. She drained her wine glass and considered getting another, then thought better of it. She needed to stay sharp, needed to be ready in case James decided to address the elephant in the room that apparently only she could see. She was contemplating making an early exit, had just started mentally mapping the fastest route to the elevator, when the music suddenly cut off. The abrupt silence made everyone turn toward the sound system, where James now stood holding a microphone, Lauren beside him with an amused expression. "Sorry to interrupt the festivities," James said, his voice carrying easily across the terrace. "But Lauren and I wanted to take a moment to thank all of you for another incredible quarter. Your hard work and dedication are what make this company successful, and we don't say it enough, so we're saying it now. Thank you." Applause rippled through the crowd, and Emma clapped along, grateful for something to do with her hands besides shake. "Before we get back to celebrating," James continued, and something in his tone made Emma's stomach drop, "I wanted to share something with all of you. Yesterday evening, I received what I can honestly say is the most memorable voicemail of my professional career." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Emma's vision tunneled, everything except James's face fading into insignificance. Number. He wouldn't. He couldn't possibly be about to. "Now, I'm not usually one to air personal matters in professional settings," James went on, his eyes scanning the crowd, and Emma wanted to die, wanted the rooftop to open up beneath her and swallow her whole. But this particular voicemail was so honest, so unexpectedly brave, that I think it deserves to be heard. His gaze found hers across the crowd, held it, and Emma couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't do anything except stare back in absolute horror. Emma Clark, one of our finest analysts, and someone whose work I've admired for 2 years now, called me last night and left me a message. James's expression was unreadable, his voice steady and calm, and Emma felt tears prick her eyes as the blood drained from her face. Everyone was looking around now, trying to figure out who Emma Clark was, and those who knew her were turning to stare, their expressions ranging from curious to shocked. This was it. This was how her career ended, how she became the cautionary tale people told about maintaining professional boundaries, how she would be remembered. The girl who drunk-dialed her boss and confessed her feelings at a company party. "I'm going to play it for you now," James said, and Emma heard someone laugh nervously, unsure if this was a joke, and she wanted to run, wanted to push through the crowd and disappear, but her legs wouldn't cooperate, wouldn't move, and Sophie was going to kill her for not running when she had the chance. James pulled out his phone, tapped the screen, and Emma's own voice filled the air, slightly slurred and painfully earnest. "James, Hi, it's Emma. Emma Clark. Obviously. You know who I am. We work together. That was stupid to say. The crowd was silent now, everyone listening with rapt attention as Emma's recorded confession played for all to hear. She could hear herself thinking about him all the time, about the way he smiled, about how he remembered her coffee order, and each word felt like a physical blow. Tears were sliding down her cheeks now, hot and humiliating, and she couldn't wipe them away because that would mean acknowledging they were there, acknowledging any of this was happening. She could see her colleagues' faces, some sympathetic, some awkward, some clearly enjoying the drama unfolding before them. Marcus beside her had gone very quiet, and someone else was whispering behind their hand. The voicemail continued, her voice cracking as it talked about being terrified of ruining everything, about falling in love with him, about being exhausted from pretending. It seemed to go on forever, every vulnerable word exposed to the harsh light of public scrutiny. And Emma had never felt more naked, more utterly destroyed. When her recorded voice finally said goodbye and the message ended, the silence that followed was deafening. Emma couldn't look at anyone, couldn't bear to see their reactions, could only stare at the ground and wish desperately for the ability to turn invisible. Then James spoke again, his voice softer now, gentler. Emma, where are you? She couldn't answer, couldn't force words past the lump in her throat. But she didn't need to because people were parting, creating a path between them. And James was walking toward her, the microphone forgotten, his eyes locked on hers. Emma's breath came in short, painful gasps as he stopped in front of her, close enough that she could see the flecks of blue in his gray eyes, close enough that everyone could hear whatever he was about to say. That was the bravest thing anyone has ever said to me, he said quietly. And Emma blinked, confused, because that wasn't what she'd expected, wasn't what he was supposed to say. I should have said something sooner, James continued, reaching out to brush a tear from her cheek with his thumb. The gesture so tender, it made Emma's chest ache. I should have told you months ago that you're the first person I think about when I wake up, and the last person I think about before I sleep. That I find excuses to walk past your desk because seeing you smile makes my entire day better. That I remember your coffee order because I want to remember everything about you. His other hand came up to cup her face, his touch warm and steady, and Emma couldn't quite process what was happening, couldn't make sense of the words coming out of his mouth. I'm your boss, James said, his voice carrying across the silent terrace. And I've been trying so hard to be professional, to not cross lines, to not put you in an uncomfortable position. But the truth is, Emma Clark, I've been falling in love with you since approximately your second week here, when you stayed until midnight, fixing a client presentation that wasn't even your responsibility, and then apologized for not having it done sooner. You're brilliant and dedicated, and you have this way of seeing solutions that nobody else sees. And yes, I notice how you smile when you're reading something funny, and I deliberately remember your coffee order because I'm looking for any excuse to take care of you in the small ways I'm allowed to. Emma stared at him, her mind struggling to catch up with what was happening, to reconcile the nightmare she'd been living for the past 24 hours. With this impossible reality unfolding before her. James Hartwell, her boss, the man she'd been convinced would be horrified by her confession, was standing in front of their entire company, telling her he loved her back. It didn't make sense. None of this made sense. You're not firing me? She managed to whisper, her voice hoarse from crying. James laughed, a real laugh, warm and full of relief, and shook his head. Firing you? Emma, I'm trying to tell you that I want to date you, if you'll have me. If I haven't completely terrified you with this grand gesture that Lauren convinced me was romantic, but now that I'm doing it, seems possibly insane. Behind James, Emma could see Lauren giving her a thumbs up, looking enormously pleased with herself, and the crowd had started to murmur, voices rising in excitement and surprise. Emma's colleagues were smiling now, some of them clapping, and Marcus squeezed her shoulder supportively before stepping back to give them space. "You played my voicemail," Emma said, still trying to process everything. "In front of everyone. James, I thought you were about to humiliate me." His expression turned serious, apologetic. "I know, and I'm sorry for the shock. But I needed you to understand something. I needed everyone to understand. What you did, calling me and being that honest, that vulnerable, that took courage I can barely comprehend. And I wanted you to know that I don't think it's something to be embarrassed about. I think it's something to be celebrated." He glanced around at their colleagues, then back at her, his hand still cradling her face like she was something precious. "I wanted everyone here to know that I'm the lucky one, that Emma Clark, who could have her pick of anyone, chose to have feelings for me. And I'm not going to hide that, or downplay it, or pretend it's not the best thing that's ever happened to me. I wanted to make a statement. And yes, Lauren suggested this might be too dramatic, but I've spent 2 years being careful and professional, and it's gotten me nowhere except alone. So I decided dramatic was worth trying." Emma let out a breath that was half laugh, half sob. "You could have just called me back." "I could have," James agreed, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. "But where's the fun in that? Plus, now everyone knows you're off limits, which means I don't have to watch Marcus from accounting trying to flirt with you at company events anymore." "You noticed that?" Emma asked, surprised, and James smiled that rare smile she loved, boyish and unguarded. "I notice everything about you, Emma. It's a problem I've been dealing with for quite some time." Around them, someone started clapping, and then others joined in, and suddenly the entire party was applauding, cheering, a few people whistling. Emma felt her cheeks flush, but for the first time all day, it wasn't from embarrassment. It was from the realization that this was really happening. That James was really standing here, confessing his feelings in front of their entire company. That the nightmare had somehow transformed into something that felt suspiciously like a dream. "So," James said, his voice low enough that only she could hear beneath the noise, "does this mean you'll go out with me? Officially, maybe somewhere that doesn't involve spreadsheets or quarterly reports?" Emma nodded, not trusting her voice, and then she was laughing and crying simultaneously as James pulled her into his arms, holding her close, and she could feel his heart beating fast against her cheek. "For the record," she said against his shirt, "this is the most insane way anyone has ever asked me out." "I'll try to be more conventional next time," he promised, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. And Emma felt something that had been tightly wound in her chest for months finally loosen, finally relax. The party resumed around them, the music starting up again, conversations flowing. But Emma and James stayed where they were for a long moment, wrapped up in each other, the city lights glittering behind them. Finally, Lauren appeared at James's elbow, grinning widely. "I told you it would work." "You owe me $20. James reluctantly released Emma, keeping one arm around her waist, and gave his business partner an exasperated look. "You bet on this?" "Oh, please," Lauren said, waving dismissively. "I bet Sophie $20 you'd pull something dramatic. She thought you'd do the sensible thing and call her privately. I knew you better." At the mention of Sophie, Emma gasped. "Oh God, Sophie! I have to call her. She's going to kill me for not warning her that this—" She gestured vaguely at the terrace, at James, at everything. "That this was how it turned out. Already texted her," Lauren said smugly. "She says congratulations, and also that you're buying the wine next time, since your love life is now more interesting than hers." Emma shook her head. overwhelmed by everything that had happened in the span of 20 minutes, by the whiplash of going from certain professional doom to being held by the man she'd been in love with for months. "I can't believe this is real," she admitted, looking up at James. "I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and discover this was some elaborate anxiety dream." James's arm tightened around her waist. "It's real. Though I should probably mention that we'll need to report this to HR. There are policies about supervisors dating direct reports, and I want to do everything by the book." Emma's stomach dropped slightly. "Will that be a problem?" "It means one of us will need to transfer to a different team," James explained. "Usually in these situations, since I'm CEO, you'd be the one to move. But I want you to have a choice in this, Emma. Your career matters, and I won't let our relationship impact your growth here. We'll figure out something that works for both of us." The fact that he was already thinking practically, already considering her career and her choices, made Emma fall a little more in love with him. "We'll figure it out," she agreed. "Together." "Together," James repeated, and the way he said it, like a promise, made Emma's heart skip. The party continued, but Emma barely registered what was happening around her. She was too caught up in the feeling of James's hand in hers, the way he kept glancing at her, like he couldn't quite believe she was real either. The easy conversation that flowed between them now that the walls had finally come down. Colleagues stopped by to offer congratulations, some teasing, some genuinely happy for them, and Emma found herself laughing more than she had in months. Marcus appeared at one point, good-naturedly admitting defeat and saying he'd always known she was out of his league anyway, and Emma hugged him, grateful for his graciousness. As the evening wore on and the crowd began to thin, James suggested they slip away, go somewhere quieter, where they could actually talk without the entire company watching their every move. Emma agreed immediately, suddenly desperate to be alone with him, to have a conversation that wasn't being performed for an audience. They made their goodbyes, Lauren giving Emma a knowing wink and whispering that she'd cover for them tomorrow if they wanted to take a long lunch. And then they were in the elevator, descending toward the street, and Emma felt giddy with the impossibility of it all. "Where do you want to go?" James asked as they stepped out into the cool evening air. Emma considered. She could suggest dinner or drinks or a walk along the waterfront. But what she really wanted, what she'd wanted for months, was just to be near him without pretense or performance. "Your place?" she suggested, then immediately second-guessed herself. "Unless that's too forward. I just meant somewhere we could talk without—" James cut her off with a kiss, gentle but thorough, his hand cupping the back of her neck, and when he pulled away, Emma's thoughts had scattered like leaves. "My place is perfect," he said, his voice slightly rough. "Fair warning, though, it's not nearly as impressive as the office. I'm not actually great at interior decorating." They caught a cab, and the ride to James's apartment in the west end of the city passed in a blur of nervous anticipation. Emma's hand was clasped in James's, his thumb tracing circles on her palm, and she kept stealing glances at him, at this man who had somehow seen through her professional exterior to the feelings she'd been trying so hard to hide. "I really thought you were going to fire me," she admitted, as the cab navigated through evening traffic. "When you started playing that voicemail, I genuinely considered jumping off the roof." James winced. "I'm sorry." Lauren said the shock would make the payoff better, but in retrospect, I should have maybe given you some warning. Text me next time you're planning to leave a drunken confession so I can prepare an appropriate response that doesn't involve public humiliation. "There won't be a next time," Emma said firmly. "I've learned my lesson about drunk dialing. From now on, all my confessions will be made sober and in private." "I don't know," James teased. "Drunk Emma has excellent timing. If you'd called me during business hours, I probably would have panicked and said something stupid about maintaining professional boundaries." The voicemail gave me time to process, to realize that I didn't want to maintain professional boundaries anymore. I wanted you. The simple directness of the statement made Emma's breath catch. They'd arrived at James's building, a converted warehouse with industrial chic details and large windows. He paid the cab driver and led Emma inside, his hand warm and steady in hers. The apartment was on the 4th floor, and as James unlocked the door, Emma felt her nervousness ratchet up several notches. This was happening. She was really here, about to enter her boss's apartment, about to cross the line from colleague to something else entirely. The door swung open to reveal a space that was quintessentially James, clean lines and minimal furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of the city lights, bookshelves lining one entire wall. It was masculine, but not aggressively so, comfortable in a way that suggested someone actually lived here rather than just used it as a place to sleep between workdays. "Can I get you something to drink?" James asked, suddenly seeming as nervous as Emma felt. "Wine? Coffee? Water?" "Water would be great," Emma said, mostly because her mouth had gone dry, and she needed something to do with her hands. She wandered over to the bookshelves while James disappeared into the kitchen, scanning the titles. Literature mixed with business books, mixed with what appeared to be an extensive collection of mystery novels. She pulled out a worn copy of The Big Sleep and smiled. "You like Raymond Chandler?" she called out. "Obsessed with Chandler," James replied, returning with 2 glasses of water. "I've read everything he wrote at least 3 times. There's something about the way he writes about Los Angeles, about making the cynical romantic." Emma turned to face him, the book still in her hands. "I wouldn't have guessed that about you. At work, you're so focused, so all business. I didn't know you had a secret noir obsession." James set the glasses down on the coffee table and moved closer, close enough that Emma could smell his cologne again, that woodsy scent that made her slightly dizzy. "There's a lot you don't know about me yet. I'm looking forward to you finding out." The yet hung in the air between them, full of promise and possibility. Emma replaced the book on the shelf, her hands trembling slightly. "I'm still processing that this is real, that you actually feel the same way. This morning I was convinced my career was over, and I'd have to move to a different city to escape the humiliation. I should have told you sooner," James said, guilt creeping into his expression. "I've wasted so much time being professional, being appropriate, when I could have just been honest. Emma, I've been miserable trying to maintain distance from you. Every time I had to treat you like just another employee, every time I had to keep our conversation strictly professional, it felt like I was denying something fundamental. Lauren's been telling me for months that I was being an idiot, that life's too short to let company policies dictate personal happiness." Emma moved closer, emboldened by his honesty. "What changed? What made you decide to play the voicemail tonight instead of just calling me privately?" James reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "Hearing you say you'd been falling in love with me, hearing how scared you were of ruining things, it made me realize that I'd already ruined things by not being brave enough to admit how I felt. You took this enormous risk, put your heart out there despite being terrified, and I thought, what kind of man would I be if I didn't match that courage? If I just called you and said, 'Hey, thanks for the message. I like you too. Want to grab coffee?' That wouldn't have been enough. It wouldn't have shown you how much you mean to me." His thumb brushed across her lower lip, and Emma forgot how to breathe. "So I decided to make a statement. To show you and everyone else that I'm all in, that I'm not going to hide this or treat it like something to be ashamed of." It was definitely a statement, Emma managed, her voice barely above a whisper. They were so close now, barely any space between them, and she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "For what it's worth, I think it might be the most romantic thing anyone's ever done for me, even if I did almost have a heart attack in the process." James laughed softly, his forehead coming to rest against hers. I'll try to be less heart attack-inducing in the future. Though I can't promise I won't occasionally do something dramatic. It seems to be working for me so far. Then he was kissing her again, and this time there was no audience, no performance, just the two of them finally giving in to what they'd both been wanting for months. Emma's hands found his shirt, gripping the fabric as she kissed him back with all the pent-up longing she'd been suppressing. James's arms came around her waist, pulling her flush against him, and Emma made a sound that might have been embarrassing if she'd been capable of caring about anything beyond the feeling of his mouth on hers, the solid warmth of his body, the way he held her like she was something precious. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, James rested his forehead against hers again. "I've wanted to do that for so long," he admitted, his voice rough. "Every time you came into my office with reports, every time we worked late together, I wanted to kiss you and couldn't." "Well, you can now," Emma pointed out, still a little dizzy from the kiss. "No more professional boundaries keeping us apart." "About that," James said, his expression turning more serious. "We really do need to talk about the logistics. I meant what I said about reporting this to HR and making sure we handle everything properly. Your career is important, and I won't let our relationship jeopardize it." Emma appreciated his conscientiousness, even as part of her wanted to ignore practical concerns in favor of kissing him again. "What are our options?" James guided her to the couch, and they sat down, his arm around her shoulders, her body tucked against his side. It felt natural, comfortable, like they'd been doing this for years instead of minutes. Option 1. You transfer to Lauren's team. She's officially your supervisor. I become your boyfriend, but not your boss, and we avoid any conflicts of interest. Option 2. We keep things quiet for now, while we figure out a longer-term solution. Option 3. We both acknowledge that life's too short and complicated to follow every rule perfectly, and we navigate the gray areas as best we can. Emma considered. The idea of transferring teams didn't thrill her. She loved the projects she worked on, the clients she'd built relationships with, but she also understood why it might be necessary. "What do you want?" she asked James. "What option works best for you?" "Honestly, I want option 1, James admitted. Not because I don't trust us to maintain professionalism, but because I don't want there to ever be a question about your achievements. If you stay on my team and we're dating, every promotion, every raise, every recognition you receive will be questioned. People will assume I'm showing favoritism, and you're too talented, too hard-working for your accomplishments to be diminished that way." The fact that he was thinking about her career advancement, about protecting her professional reputation, made Emma's chest tight with emotion. "You're right," she said quietly. "I hadn't thought about it that way, but you're right. If I transfer to Lauren's team, do I lose my projects?" "We'd transition them over time," James said. "And honestly, Lauren's been wanting someone with your analytical skills on her team for months. She'd be thrilled to have you. Plus, it means we could actually have lunch together without everyone speculating about what we're discussing." Emma laughed despite herself. "I suppose there are perks to not having to hide that we're dating." "Many perks," James agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Like being able to do this whenever I want, and telling people you're my girlfriend without worrying about HR violations, and taking you to company events as my date, instead of just watching you from across the room and wishing I could." The word girlfriend sent a thrill through Emma that she tried to play cool about and failed spectacularly. "Girlfriend. I'm going to be James Hartwell's girlfriend. Sophie is never going to let me live this down." "Is Sophie the friend who encouraged you to leave the voicemail?" James asked, amused. "Because I owe her a thank you gift. Maybe a very expensive bottle of wine." "She'll hold you to that," Emma warned. "And yes, she basically pushed me into calling you. Though in my defense, I was already drunk and emotional. She just provided the final push. James's expression turned tender. I'm glad she did. I'm glad you were brave enough to be honest, even with wine courage. It gave me permission to be honest, too. They talked for hours, curled up on James's couch, sharing stories and secrets, learning about each other beyond the professional facades they'd maintained for so long. Emma learned that James had originally wanted to be a photographer, that he still shot film on weekends sometimes, capturing the city in black and white. James learned that Emma had once considered becoming a teacher, that she'd spent a summer volunteering at a literacy program and still sometimes wondered what that path might have looked like. They discussed their families, their fears, their dreams, all the intimate details that transform acquaintances into something deeper. Around midnight, Emma reluctantly acknowledged that she should probably go home, that showing up to work tomorrow in the same clothes would generate gossip they didn't need, while everything was still so new. James called her a car, then walked her down to wait, his fingers laced through hers. Tomorrow's going to be interesting, Emma said as they stood on the sidewalk, the city quiet around them. Everyone's going to have questions. Let them ask, James said simply. We have nothing to hide. We're two adults who happen to have feelings for each other and are handling it responsibly. If anyone has a problem with that, they can take it up with me. The car arrived, and James opened the door for her. But before she could get in, he pulled her close for one more kiss. Slow and sweet and full of promise. Text me when you get home so I know you're safe, he murmured against her lips. And Emma? Thank you for being brave enough to call me. Thank you for saying what I'd been too afraid to say. Emma smiled, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. Thank you for not firing me. And for the dramatic public declaration. And for being exactly who I hoped you'd be underneath all that professional distance. She kissed him once more, quick and light, then slid into the car. As it pulled away from the curb, she turned to watch James through the back window, standing under the streetlight, his hands in his pockets, watching her go. She pulled out her phone and found 17 messages from Sophie, each one more excited and demanding details than the last. The next morning arrived too quickly, but for the first time in recent memory, Emma wasn't dreading going to the office. She chose her outfit with care, wanting to look professional, but also like someone who might be dating the CEO, then laughed at herself for the thought. She was dating the CEO. It still didn't feel entirely real, like at any moment she'd wake up and discover the entire previous evening had been an elaborate dream. But her phone proved otherwise. A good morning text from James, waiting when she checked it. Simple, but enough to make her smile like an idiot over her coffee. The office was buzzing when she arrived, and Emma could feel eyes following her as she made her way to her desk. She kept her head high, her expression calm, refusing to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her uncomfortable. She'd just settled into her chair when Lauren appeared, perching on the edge of her desk with a grin. So, that was quite the party last night. Emma felt her cheeks heat. Lauren, I'm so sorry if we made things awkward. I know it's complicated with company policies and— Stop, Lauren interrupted, holding up a hand. I'm thrilled. Genuinely. I've been watching James be miserable and professional for months, and you've been equally miserable trying to pretend you weren't in love with him. Last night was perfect. Dramatic, sure, but perfect. James said I should transfer to your team, Emma said, relieved that Lauren seemed genuinely happy rather than concerned. To avoid any conflicts of interest. Is that something you'd actually want? Or were you just being polite? Lauren's expression turned serious, businesslike. Emma, I've been trying to poach you from James's team since you finished that Whitmore analysis 6 months ago. You're exactly the kind of analyst I need. Thorough, creative, not afraid to challenge assumptions. If you're willing to transfer, I'll make it worth your while. Better projects, more client-facing work, and yes, The perk of being able to date our CEO without anyone questioning your professional merit. Emma felt relief wash over her. Then yes, I'd love to transfer to your team. Excellent. I'll get the paperwork started today. Lauren stood, then paused. For what it's worth, I think you're good for him. James is brilliant at business, but terrible at taking care of himself, at letting himself be human instead of just a CEO. You make him remember there's more to life than quarterly earnings and market share. She squeezed Emma's shoulder. Welcome to the team. The morning passed in a blur of work and curious glances from colleagues. Some stopped by to offer congratulations, others to fish for details, and Emma handled each interaction with as much grace as she could manage. She was finishing up a report when her desk phone rang. James's extension. Her heart did a stupid little flip. Emma Clark speaking, she answered, keeping her voice professional despite knowing it was him. Ms. Clark, this is Mr. Hartwell, James said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. I'm calling to inform you that I'm taking my girlfriend to lunch in half an hour. Please clear your schedule. Emma bit back a laugh. Your girlfriend is very busy, Mr. Hartwell. She has reports to finish. Her reports can wait. Her boyfriend is insistent. Meet me in the lobby in 30 minutes. And Emma? His voice dropped lower, more intimate. Wear that smile I love, the one you're trying to hide right now. She was, in fact, smiling so widely her cheeks hurt. I'll see you in 30 minutes. She hung up and immediately texted Sophie. He's taking me to lunch and called me his girlfriend. I'm going to combust. Sophie's response was immediate. I told you it would work out. Also, you owe me for pushing you to make that call. Expensive wine. The good stuff. Emma laughed and tucked her phone away, feeling lighter than she had in months. Exactly 30 minutes later, she found James waiting in the lobby, looking unfairly handsome in a charcoal suit, his expression transforming when he saw her approaching. Ready? He asked, offering his arm, and Emma took it without hesitation. They walked to a small Italian restaurant 2 blocks away, one Emma had passed 100 times but never entered. James seemed to be a regular. The host greeted him by name and led them to a quiet corner table. I've been coming here for years, James explained once they were seated. Best carbonara in the city, and they don't bother me while I'm eating. Emma studied the menu, hyper-aware of James's eyes on her. You're staring, she said without looking up. I'm allowed to stare now. It's one of the perks of dating you. He reached across the table, his fingers finding hers. How was your morning? Any fallout from last night? Surprisingly minimal, Emma admitted. A few curious questions, some congratulations, but nothing terrible. Lauren officially offered me a position on her team, so that's handled. How about you? James grimaced slightly. 3 separate HR meetings about proper protocol. A very long conversation with our lawyer about potential liability issues, and approximately 47 emails from people I barely know offering relationship advice. Emma winced sympathetically. I'm sorry. I didn't think about how complicated this would make things for you. Don't apologize, James said firmly. Emma, you're worth every complicated conversation, every HR meeting, every protocol we have to navigate. I meant what I said last night. I'm all in. Their food arrived, and they ate slowly, talking and laughing. The awkwardness from their previous professional dynamic completely evaporated. James told her about his first disastrous attempt at starting the company, how he and Lauren had almost gone bankrupt in the first year before landing a client that saved them. Emma shared stories from her college days, the terrible jobs she'd worked to pay tuition, the moment she'd realized she wanted to work in marketing. They were so engrossed in conversation that Emma didn't notice the time until James checked his watch and swore softly. We've been here for 2 hours. I have a meeting in 15 minutes. They hurried back to the office, and James walked her to the elevator, reluctant to let her go. "Dinner tonight?" he asked. "My place again? I'll actually cook this time instead of just talking." Emma pretended to consider. "What are you making?" "Whatever you want. I'm a decent cook when I'm trying to impress someone." She stood on her toes and kissed him quickly, not caring who might see. "Then yes. Text me your address even though I already know it, and I'll bring wine." James's smile was brilliant, unguarded. "It's a date." He squeezed her hand once more before heading toward the stairs, and Emma watched him go, still half convinced this was all some elaborate daydream. The afternoon passed more quickly than the morning. Emma transferred her files to her new computer, her new desk on Lauren's side of the floor, and began familiarizing herself with the projects she'd be taking over. It was exciting, actually, this fresh start, these new challenges. By 5:30, she was packing up her things when her phone buzzed. James. "Rain check on dinner?" Emergency client call just came in. Might be here until midnight. Emma felt a stab of disappointment, but understood. This was the reality of dating someone who ran a company. His time wasn't entirely his own. She texted back, "No problem. Tomorrow night instead?" His response came immediately. "Tomorrow, definitely." "I'm sorry. I was looking forward to tonight." Emma smiled at her phone, typing, "Me too. But we have time. All the time in the world now." She gathered her things and headed home, stopping for takeout on the way. Her apartment felt emptier than usual, but she distracted herself by calling Sophie and recounting every detail of the past 24 hours, from the horror of the voicemail being played to the perfection of James's confession to the promise of many more dinners to come. Sophie listened with gratifying enthusiasm, interrupting occasionally to demand more details or to say, "I told you so," in varying tones of smugness. The next few weeks fell into a pattern that felt both thrilling and comfortable. Emma settled into her new role on Lauren's team, discovering that she loved the different perspective and the new challenges. James was busy, as CEOs tended to be, but he made time for her in ways that mattered. Lunch dates when their schedules aligned, late-night phone calls when he was traveling, weekend mornings at his apartment, coffee and newspapers, and comfortable silence. They were learning each other, all the small intimacies that come with building a relationship, and Emma found herself happier than she could remember being. Of course, dating her former boss came with unique complications. There were days when James had to make decisions that affected her indirectly, when he had to be CEO first and boyfriend second, and those moments required careful navigation. There were office gossips who speculated about favoritism despite Emma's transfer. There were times when keeping their professional and personal lives separate felt nearly impossible, but they worked through each challenge as it came, communicating openly, supporting each other, building something that felt solid and real. 2 months after the party, after Emma had been officially on Lauren's team long enough that people had mostly stopped commenting on her relationship with James, he took her back to the rooftop terrace. It was a Friday evening, the office empty, the city spread out below them in a carpet of lights. "I wanted to bring you here," James said, his arm around her waist as they stood at the railing. "Because this is where everything changed, where I stopped being afraid and started being honest." Emma leaned into him, remembering that night, the terror and humiliation that had transformed so unexpectedly into joy. "Best worst night of my life," she said. "I still can't believe you played that voicemail." "I can't believe you left it," James countered. "Thank God for wine and brave friends pushing you to make questionable decisions." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the city. Then James shifted, turning to face her fully, his expression serious in a way that made Emma's heart skip. "I have something to tell you," he said. and Emma's mind immediately spiraled to worst-case scenarios before he continued. I love you. I've been wanting to say it for weeks, but I wanted to wait until I was sure you'd believe me, until enough time had passed that you'd know it wasn't just infatuation or novelty. Emma Clark, I am completely, thoroughly in love with you. Emma's eyes filled with tears, the good kind, the kind that came from being overwhelmingly happy. I love you too, she said, her voice cracking slightly. I think I have since before I even admitted it to myself. Definitely since before the voicemail. James cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears that had started to fall. That voicemail changed my life, gave me permission to want what I wanted instead of what I thought I should want. I'm grateful every single day that you got drunk and called me. Emma laughed through her tears. I'm never living that down, am I? Never, James agreed, grinning. It's part of our story now. The time Emma got drunk and confessed her feelings on voicemail, and her idiot boss played it at a company party because he didn't know how else to say he loved her back. He kissed her then, slow and deep and full of promise, and Emma thought about how strange life was, how you could go from convinced your world was ending to discovering it was actually just beginning, how a moment of drunken courage could lead to this, to standing on a rooftop with someone who saw you completely and loved you anyway. Come home with me, James murmured against her lips. Stay tonight. Stay every night if you want. Emma pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. Are you asking me to move in with you? Eventually, James said. Not tonight. We've only been dating 2 months. But someday soon. I like waking up with you, Emma. I like having you in my space, in my life. I want more of that. Emma's heart felt too big for her chest, too full of love and hope and possibility. Someday soon, she agreed. But for now, yes. Let's go home. They left the terrace hand in hand, the city glittering below them, the future stretching out bright and uncertain and entirely theirs to create. Emma thought about the girl who'd made that drunken phone call, terrified and vulnerable and brave without knowing it. She thought about all the moments that had led them here, the professional distance and suppressed feelings and careful boundaries. And she thought about how sometimes the scariest thing you could do was also exactly the right thing, how honesty had a way of cracking open doors you'd thought were permanently closed. In the elevator, James pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. Thank you, he said softly, for being brave enough to tell me how you felt. For giving us a chance. Emma wrapped her arms around his waist, breathing in the familiar scent of his cologne. Thank you for not firing me, and for the dramatic public confession, and for being someone worth falling in love with. James laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest, setting the bar pretty low there with the not firing thing. It's a start, Emma teased. They drove to James's apartment through evening traffic, talking easily, planning their weekend, discussing everything and nothing. When they arrived, James unlocked the door and gestured her inside with a flourish. Welcome home, he said. And though it wasn't officially her home yet, it felt like it, felt like a place where she belonged. They spent the evening cooking dinner together, James teaching Emma his carbonara recipe, while she chopped vegetables and stole kisses between tasks. They ate on the couch, plates balanced on their laps, watching an old noir film James had been wanting to show her. They talked through most of it, too caught up in each other to focus on the screen, and eventually abandoned the movie entirely in favor of other activities that left them tangled together, breathless and laughing and completely content. Later, lying in James's bed with her head on his chest, Emma felt a wave of gratitude so intense it made her throat tight. Gratitude for Sophie, and wine, and liquid courage. Gratitude for James's dramatic gesture, and his willingness to risk looking foolish, gratitude for second chances and honest conversations, and love that grew from friendship and respect. "What are you thinking about?" James asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "How lucky I am," Emma admitted. "How easily this could have gone differently. If you hadn't felt the same way, if you'd handled it differently, if I'd been too afraid to say anything at all." James pressed a kiss to her forehead. "But you weren't too afraid. You were braver than I was. You made the first move, took the first risk. I just followed your lead." "We can call it a team effort," Emma suggested. "You did play my private voicemail at a company party, which requires its own special kind of bravery. Or insanity. The line's pretty thin." "Definitely insanity," James agreed. "But it worked. That's what matters." They fell silent, comfortable in the quiet, in the simple pleasure of being together. Emma felt herself drifting toward sleep, warm and safe and loved. Just before she succumbed completely, she murmured, "James." I'm glad I called you, even though it was terrifying, even though I thought it would ruin everything. I'm glad I did it." His arms tightened around her. "So am I, love. So am I." Emma smiled against his chest and let herself fall asleep, dreaming of rooftop parties and drunken confessions and the strange, wonderful ways that life could surprise you when you were brave enough to be honest about what you wanted. Somewhere in her bag, her phone buzzed with a text from Sophie. Staying at his place? Emma would answer in the morning. For now, she was exactly where she wanted to be, wrapped up in the arms of the man she loved, their future spread out before them, full of promise and possibility. The voicemail that had seemed like a disaster had turned out to be the best decision she'd ever made, even if it had required wine and a helpful push from her best friend to make it happen. What did you think of their story? Share your thoughts in the comments. On a scale from 0 to 10, what's your rating? Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to follow all our stories. And check out more emotional stories by clicking on the end screen.